Spotlighting Hawaii's leaders.
We want to bring in Governor David E.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Lieutenant Governor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Mayor Derek Kawakami.
Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Spotlighting the issues.
Where is the virus right now in our community?
How much is this overall going to cost the state?
How are you responding to the community's concerns? Talk about the level of citations that you guys are writing.
Spotlight Hawaii with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.
Well, happy Aloha Friday. Thanks for tuning in here to Spotlight Hawaii on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. I'm Ryan Kalei Suji, joined by Yunji Denise. And this morning we continue our focus on all the activity that's happening on Hawaii Island and at Mauna Loa.
Yeah, I want to get on a plane and go see it for myself. We can't do that, but we have invited an expert this morning to tell us more about what is happening on Hawaii Island. Volcanology Professor Julia Hammer from the Mauna Loa School of Ocean and Earth Science and Technology. Professor, thanks for being here.
Thanks. Delighted to be here.
So let's start with the basics. At last check, how is this eruption progressing and what is the status at the moment?
Okay, well, first, I'm just going to say how remarkable it is that I can give you information that's as current as 20 minutes ago, basically, because the U.S. Geological Survey posts a couple of times per day updates on the activity. So we have really quite fresh information. And it seems like the activity is in a increasingly sluggish, let's say, phase. Two of the four fissures that have been active are no longer producing lava at all. And the two that remain seem to be slowing down in their output. And the advance rate is also seemingly almost stagnated to the point of, difficult to measure, in fact.
With this flow, we're hearing a lot of references to what has happened in the past, a lot of research being done on things and references being made to prior lava flows of Mauna Loa. What can you tell us about how this is different from others in the past? And we'll take a few. We'll actually show a few photos, courtesy of the USGS, as you speak through this.
Right. Yeah. So Mauna Loa is a volcano that has been intensely studied, and we are really benefiting from two-pronged approaches. One is the amazing record of prehistoric eruptions that's made possible by detailed geologic mapping and radiocarbon dating. So we know a lot about the recurrence interval and the volume output and the lengths of lava flows and their ages and that sort of thing from basic geologic mapping. But then on top of that, we have a historic record that tells us about emplacement durations and the styles of activity and how the channel might turn off in one area and open up in another area, and fissures can move around. So we have kind of a sequential data stream that is made possible by the historic observations of the volcano. And then on top of that, we have the modern era of scientific instrumentation. So these days, we can see when the volcano seems to be waking up or showing signs of unrest months in advance. So there was seismic activity that signaled an awakening and a recharge of magma into the volcanic edifice. That was also reinforced by tilt meter observations that showed the volcano was actually inflating. Points across the summit area actually getting further apart, so the volcano is sort of inflating like a balloon. All of that was known before the onset of eruption and arrival of lava at the surface on November 27th. And now, since the eruption has started, there's even more deployments possible. We've got boots on the ground, of course, the geologists from the U.S. Geological Survey, collecting samples and analyzing those samples to learn about the history that immediately preceded this eruption. And of course, there's also satellite imagery showing us where the VOG plume is, or where the SO2 plume is heading, and giving us an estimate of VOG hazards. Just all sorts of data are available. So that all of that to say that this particular eruption is unfolding in a way that's pretty similar to the other historic events from the volcano. So all 33 of the historic eruptions of Mauna Loa have initiated at the summit, and that happened again on this one. And then half of them stayed in the summit, and then the other half are just, move on to one of the rift zones, either the southwest rift zone or the northeast rift zone. And so kind of according to pattern, that was the case here too, where the north east rift zone became the dominant active one. And that's exactly what we're seeing. In terms of advanced velocities, also seemingly pretty similar considering the shallow slope and what the output seems to be. Looks pretty close to the pattern of other historic eruptions that have taken place on that rift zone.
I'm interested, we've had so much focus on what's going to happen with Daniel K. Inouye Highway, that major thoroughfare that connecting the two sides of the islands. Let's take a look. This is a map, and I know there's probably one that's a little earlier or a little more recent, but they haven't quite put it out yet. This is basically tracking the progress at last count, I believe, yesterday. But somewhere between 2 to 3 miles away from the road at this point. Tell us what you think the likelihood of this is reaching the road and perhaps impacting that roadway.
Yeah, so yesterday it was like 3.2 miles away from the road, and today it's 2.7, so it's kind of incrementally inching forward. But at the same time, the flow front has stagnated, so we can't really use the rate that we've seen, between yesterday and today to extrapolate very accurately, because something could change, like a flow front stagnation, that will really increase that time before the road is threatened. On the other hand, a channel could reoccupy a current pathway and resume the same speed, so it's pretty hard to predict. But the best estimates are at least a week, if at all. But if you took today's advance rate and you just assume that it stayed constant, it would be on the order of 5 to 7 days. But like I said, it might not ever get to the road, depending on what happens upstream.
Yeah, and I apologize for our viewers.
I'm having a little bit of audio.
Yeah, we're having some audio issues, so we're going to actually reset this and hope that we can get this out. So we're going to ask the professor to come back in and reset this so that we can hopefully clear up some of the technical issues that we are experiencing right now. But as she mentioned, there is also a lot happening there on Hawaii Island, and the threat to Daniel K. Highway, knowing that is such a major thoroughfare. This is a conversation and something that we spoke about with the mayor, Hawaii Island Mayor Mitch Roth, on our last program to talk more to him directly about the impacts and significance that this would have should this be shut down, and that there are alternative routes. We're going to try and bring back the professor back in, and hopefully things are cleared up now and that you can hear us. Is everything okay on your end, Professor? Unfortunately, it looks like we are still having some technical difficulties with her this morning. And Yunji is also muted, so it's just a great show all around.
Okay. No, you're right, Ryan. I mean, this is such an important roadway, and there are a lot of people who maybe work on the hotel side, along that coast there, and make that journey on a daily basis. And so there's concern that it could impact the highway there. There's also concern that it could impact some of the Pohakaloa training area. We know that there's a lot of military activity and exercises that happen there. And so everybody's watching to see whether or not that will impact the road. Professor, can you see and hear us again?
Yes, I'm back.
Oh, that's great news. Okay. Well, let's, I want to ask you about something that the mayor did bring up, and that was that this flow is a little bit different than some of the lava flows that we've experienced in the past. One thing that he noted was that, in some lava flows, you can get relatively close. A spectator can actually get pretty close and not feel a lot of impacts, if you will. But he was saying the heat from this particular flow is different. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we might be thinking back to the days at Kilauea from the Pu'uo'o eruption, which was active from 1980 until approximately 2018, where the flow field was advancing across a relatively gradual slope, and it was tube fed for much of the time with occasional breakouts. And so the style of of lava emplacement was what we call pahoehoe, and those flows tend to be thin, like decimeters, centimeters to less than a meter thick. And so the radiant heat output from a flow of that size is just simply much, much less. I hesitate to quantify less than what we have currently at the initial emplacement of an aa flow. So what's going on at Mauna Loa right now is aa lava, and those flows are meters thick. And so just the wall of heat, something that's over 1100 degrees and dropping hot rocks from the front, is just posing a much greater heat output. So the thermal energy that would hit your body as you approach the flow would just be so much greater than for a thin little pahoehoe flow. But yeah.
One of the other things that we saw with Kilauea in this most recent eruption was the different amount of fissures that were popping up in different parts of the area. Is that expected to continue with Mauna Loa? I mean, there's a central area right now of where the lava is currently coming out from, but could there be other areas within the mountain that may pose a more significant threat because of its location to communities and the slope? Or is this sort of confined to this one area and expected to just stay here?
Well, again, we can look to the pattern of historic eruptions, which would suggest that the fissure that's active, the fissure system on the Northeast Rift Zone is probably less likely, if the pattern continues, to change up and suddenly open somewhere else. However, there are exceptions to all patterns, and it can happen. And so if there were, if that were to happen and a radial vent opened, which would be not localized on a rift zone, or if it were to change to the southwest, that would represent a step increase in concern. However, that doesn't seem to be the pattern. That's not the most likely scenario.
There's a question from our audience this morning. Ingrid wants to know, has the lava entered the Pohakuloa training area? We all eyes have been focused on the roadway, but of course there is a large military presence in that area with all those training facilities. What do we know about how close it is to there?
Well, I was just looking at that this morning on the city and county traffic advisory volcanic hazards map page, which is a very nice display. And from my viewing of that, it appeared that it had entered the training area, but I'd want to look at it, closely to confirm that. But there is a resource that people can go to learn about road closures and associated hazards with the eruption. So check the city and county. I can give you the URL, but
yeah,
that's okay.
I don't want to leave the page in case.
Yeah. Sure. So, one of the other things that we saw happening around leading up to this was the frequency of the earthquakes that were happening in and around the area of Mauna Loa. Is that continuing on? Are they still experiencing those earthquakes? And why did we see, all that seismic activity? Was it because it was leading up to this eruption? And is that continuing on now?
Yeah. So the seismicity that heralded the onset of activity, starting 2 months ago, did represent, we think, if we understand the science correctly, magma being supplied to a reservoir on the order of 3 miles below the surface, and 2 to 3 miles. And that it was kind of like a charging up, a boosting of the system. And the kind of seismic activity that we see now, which is syneruptive, is less of that and more of what's called tremor, which is really telling us fluid is flowing through the fissure system, fluid meaning the molten rock. And that's really confirmation that an eruption is in progress. So when that type of seismicity goes down, we should also be seeing, a decrease in the fountain height and pretty much cessation of supply to that area. So the bigger, larger magnitude and higher frequency eruptions, earthquakes that preceded the eruptive sequence have diminished in frequency. So,
and I know that
also pointing to possibly, a decrease in the supply to the volcano, and as according to pattern, a decrease in the effusive flux.
I'm interested at the top. You noted that this was, in layman's terms, a sluggish flow at this point. And if you look at historical data, what we've heard repeatedly is that these flows in this area tend to last just a few weeks, although there are some outliers there as well. But I'm interested to know, if it reaches this kind of a pace, can it suddenly ramp back up, or do you expect it to sort of peter out, if you will? What is the pattern, and can we expect this to indeed cease in a week or two?
Well, it's kind of like weather forecasting. As soon as you say something, you get shown wrong by Mother Nature. But the overwhelming pattern at Mauna Loa is effusive flux or magma output being at a maximum near the beginning, and then a very steep decay, and without a resumption shortly thereafter. So, if that pattern holds, we've already seen the maximum output for this eruption. And we would not expect something to suddenly, resume at a high flux in any short time period from now.
Another thing that is a cause of this, of course, are some of the things that we've come to know, for those of us who live on the Big Island, is Pele's hair and some of the other things that get as a side effect to the eruption, not only just what's occurring there on the site, but how things can drift through the atmosphere. If you can explain a little bit about some of those elements, what exactly they're made of, and the impacts that they could have to the community.
I missed the audio right at the very end of your question. If I can explain a little bit about Pele's tears and hair and what they are, or so when there's fountaining, there is molten rock, which has a temperature of over 1100 degrees centigrade, that is able to stretch and stretch and stretch so thin that it becomes like a filament, like an optical fiber filament of glass. And that would be hair. And often at the tip of the hair is a bulb or a little droplet-shaped piece of glass, liquid turning into solid, so becoming glass. And that would be a tear. And sometimes the tear will break off. I don't know if I'm coming through or not. But the tears and hair are related in terms of the process of stretching that liquid and it cooling very rapidly. And then because those particles are so light, they can be carried by the wind to great distances and often will accumulate kind of tumbleweed fashion at obstacles to airflow. So they are extremely sharp. I mean, they will get under your skin just like Kiawe or something. And of course, breathing in tiny if is always a potential respiratory risk. So it's something to be concerned about, but also, if watch the wind patterns and avoid areas directly downwind of a lava fountain.
I think we're I was just gonna say, I think we're gonna have her go back and join again. We apologize to those of you who are watching, and we are going to finish our conversation with Professor Hammer in just a moment when she logs back in. But actually, that was really interesting, Ryan. As we noted, we both grew up on Hawaii Island, and no one's ever explained to me what Pele's hair is. I've seen plenty of it in my lifetime, and so that was a very interesting description of how it's basically stretched out lava that is a filament and becomes like glass. So that's really, really cool to hear. Professor, I'm also interested in some of the other health concerns that may exist around this. Of course, fog and particulates in the air. What are your concerns for the community that, are maybe downwind from where this is happening?
Right. I would say that plume of sulfur dioxide, which reacts with water molecules to make fog, volcanic smog, is one of the concerns that has the broadest impact, like the largest area of reach. Currently, though, because at a level of atmosphere that carries it above our heads, basically. Long distances, though. I saw a map yesterday showing the plume had reached Mexico, across the Pacific. But today the wind is blowing the other way, as it does, and it's heading west instead. So that plume can move around, but presently, because the eruption is so high elevation, it's very greatly dissipated by the time it reaches a population center. So it's kind of blowing over our heads at the moment by a wide margin.
I have to ask, for someone in your industry and your profession, with colleagues really throughout the world, what has this meant for you folks? I mean, I imagine you're getting a lot of calls from colleagues and people who want to learn more about what's happening there. Very few active volcanoes let alone two that are on, on the same island. What has this time been like, and the conversations that you're having with your colleagues during this time?
Oh, it's a huge amount of excitement. I mean, it's just palpable around here. At UH Manoa, we really specialize in a lot of different areas of volcanology, but my group in particular and my close colleagues here are really interested in samples. We are rocks analysts, rock people, and so we are super excited about being able to observe the materials, the first samples, and learning what they can tell us about the storage of the magma prior to eruption, how long it resided wherever it was, whether there's new magma coming from the mantle that initiated the eruption, and also the temperature and other characteristics of the lava that determine how it unfolds, how the eruption unfolds and the lava flow advances. So we're really excited about looking at the rocks. That would be my main interest.
I can imagine that there's quite a buzz around this. I'm interested. The paper did an article yesterday. The Star-Advertiser did an article talking about ways to potentially divert lava flows, and that this is something that we've not been very successful here in Hawaii. But I'm interested if there are examples around the world. Of course, all eyes on that highway and the impacts that could have in losing that thoroughfare, even if it is temporary, and having people have to drive all the way around the island when they've gotten used to that direct route. Is there a way, especially given how slow this is moving, to kind of change its course? Obviously, you can't stop a volcano, no one wants to, but perhaps redirecting the flow so that it doesn't impact something like Saddle Road.
Yeah, that's a great question, and there is precedent for attempting to divert lava, and what all of those efforts have in common is basically utilizing a fundamental feature of lava, which is that it's always cooling down. So it's a self-arresting process at its flow front. So if you can just slow it down by making it start over in a new spot, and break new ground for long enough, you can really. So that's why we're always motivated to well, not always motivated, but why it's tempting to divert from built structures. Whether or not they're successful kind of depends on if you're a glass half empty or half full kind of person. If what you need is a month of extra time to either wait the volcano out until success, but on the other hand, if your goal of success is shutting down the eruption, that's unlikely to ever be met with a diversion technique. But yeah, there's some really key lessons to be learned from other countries. Iceland and Italy have both experimented with lava diversion by built structures, and even by trying to create a detonation to redirect lava flow kind of upstream of a sensitive piece of infrastructure. And some work, some don't, and some we're never really sure. So it's not something to be taken lightly. And I have no idea whether the extent of discussions about that for this event. I'm not privy to those that level of public planning, but yeah, there's precedent.
Our time is almost up, but before we let you go, I just want to give you a final opportunity, a final word on what's happening. Any final thoughts about what you think will ultimately happen with this flow, predictions and length of time, anything that you would want to share with viewers this morning about what's happening on Mauna Loa?
Well, I guess the message to everyone out there: be safe when you're driving on Saddle Road. Don't be a distracted rubbernecker driver and be involved in an accident, because at the moment, at the current time, that's a preventable volcanic hazard. And personally, I hope it continues through the weekend, because I'd like to get over there and see it for myself in person. But even if it doesn't, share volcanologists and learn about volcanic eruptions from the comfort and safety of their computer screens. So, enjoy it, I think. This is an enjoyable eruption so far.
Professor Julia Hammer from UH Manoa, thank you so much for being with us this morning. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Again, we apologize for any of those technical issues, but her message did definitely get through. And that is that this is a very, fantastic event to watch and to get to witness so close, to be sort of a witness to history, if you will. She did note at the top there that the lava flow is really stagnant, has really slowed down. And that's some good news for those folks who are watching the impacts on the highway. We'll be interested to hear, if we do, from the military about any potential impacts to the Loa training area. She did say that on a map that she saw earlier this morning, that it did seem to have entered that space. Not clear, that's obviously a very top secret space, so we don't know a lot about the structures that are there or what could be impacted, but I'm sure a lot of folks are watching to see where it goes in that area.
Yeah, and just the overall impact that it has on the community. A lot of what she said it has been set because of what researchers in her industry, in her field, have learned from prior lava flows of Mauna Loa, and saying that this flow mirrors much of what has happened in the past with this mountain. There is a ton of research and a ton of information and data about those prior flows, and so those experts and scientists are actually using what was done and what was noted in the past to really predict what's happening here with Mauna Loa. Of course, this is the world's largest active volcano, and so a lot of eyes on here, she said as well, with a lot of people in her field very excited about all that is happening here right now with what we're seeing on Mauna Loa. But also heeding that warning, as we saw a lot of people, I'm sure through social media, we see just lines of cars, a lot of traffic in the area. And we know that that is a concern of the Hawaii County Police, as well as other county officials who worry about the number of people going to that area and the impact they could have on such a dark highway, with a lot of people, of course, seeing interest in this.
Yeah, we will be watching the flow over the weekend, and we hope that you join us back here on Monday. We will be shifting gears in a big way, talking to Honolulu Police Chief Joe Logan. He joins us from time to time to discuss updates with the department. We've got plenty to talk about. His office is getting ready to approve a number of concealed carry gun permits in our community. That's a first for Hawaii for some time. And so how is that going to all work? What are the parameters that he's put in place? How do officers feel about now encountering citizens who are legally carrying guns? There are, to my knowledge, there's about 600 folks who have filed permits that are awaiting approval. And it does sound like those approvals are coming soon. So, of course, in addition to the guns, there are the recruitment issues, the retention issues, public safety, always plenty to talk about with HPD.
Yeah, we look forward to that conversation. We hope you have a great and safe weekend. We'll see you right back here on Monday for another episode of Spotlight Hawaii. We'll see you then. Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.